Welcome to the RSP Campus to Canton podcast. Joining me, as always, is Felix Sharpe, Sharpe Review on X, or Twitter if you don't know what X is still. And of course, I'm Matt Waldman. It's always a pleasure to have you guys join us for this show today. We're going to talk about a couple of college storylines that we should look out for this week. Also, we're going to talk about some college football sleepers, players under the radar that maybe have a shot to emerge this year. Then we're going to talk a little bit about NFL. Preseason things that we notice that get analysts excited, that may be mirages, but may also be, we'll call them the Oasis, the true Oasis, kind of parsing the signal from the noise, so to speak. And then we're each going to give 5 college prospects who we were over the moon about at some point, and they did or didn't meet expectations. We'll probably give a mix. Each of us will give a mix of guys that disappointed and guys that, that the excitement was validated. But as always, you should check out campustocanton.com. This is an opportunity for you to play in a league where you've got a college side and an NFL side. Your college players migrate over to the NFL when they become draft eligible and get picked by NFL teams or signed by NFL teams. It's a really exciting way to play. It's a great way to also get better in your redraft or dynasty leagues because you're going to know all about these players from the jump, from like them being high-end high school prospects. So get over to campustocanton.com. You're going to have an awesome experience over there with those guys. It's a fast-growing format, and I'm not thinking taglines right now because I always usually give the tagline, but today we'll just say that don't miss out. You know the deal. You know what's good.
Well, here's the tagline. This is going to be a long tagline, but Matt, during our end season, we've provided some additional content to our NIL subscribers. That includes a show from yours truly, Mr. Waldman, and we just got done recording that show. So we talked a little bit about Travion Henderson, and that led into a conversation about Blake Corum and Donovan Edwards, and where they should be from a value perspective. So I'm really excited. We just added a couple of shows to our NIL subscribers, including yours. I can't wait to get the feedback. It's not even been downloaded and uploaded to our NIL podcast channel. But this season, as a part of our offerings, Mr. Waldman's doing a show, and the first one was great. I'm the only one who's heard it so far, but I think that we're going to get some good feedback from that one.
Yeah, absolutely. It should be a lot of fun. And let's get this rolling with what are some points that people should be looking for with the season underway?
Yeah, well, I think last year I came on and Mr. Waldman, you had to tell me, all right, we're not talking about Anthony Richardson this time because all I wanted to talk about was Anthony Richardson. This season, some of the main storylines, and I mentioned on the last show, are the Ohio State and Alabama quarterback rooms. Now, starters have been announced in both of those rooms now. It's Jalen Milroe at Alabama, and it's Kyle McCord at Ohio State. I think looking at week 1, Ohio State taking on Indiana, Kyle McCord was shaky in the spring game, not the crisp and high-flying Ohio State offense that we're used to. We know that Devin Brown is a gunslinger in his own right. One of these players who's going to the botch snap is going to roll around and hit the ground. He's going to pick it up and find somebody downfield and throw it downfield. Just a lot of moxie. It's been reported that Devin Brown is going to play in this game. So as far as week 1 storylines, you have to watch how this quarterback ongoing battle plays out. It's not clear if Kyle McCord is just the starter from here on out, or if the battle is continuing, because Jim Harbaugh did this last year. He did it last year with J.J. McCarthy and Cade McNamara at Michigan, where McNamara started the first game of the season, McCarthy started the second game of the season, then they determined a starter thereafter. So it's not clear, how much leash Kyle McCord has, but Ohio State takes on Indiana. I want to see how that plays out.
Let me ask you a question about that. with Ohio State, do they have the? It seems like they have the defense to be able to withstand what would be a quarterback competition in season, early in the season. Am I accurate enough to state that there's some room for errors there to say, listen, let's give some guys let's give Brown a little bit of a shot, or give him a chance to observe a little bit, and then we'll have bring him in for series or packages. And if there's McCord doesn't look good, or Brown doesn't have some bad moments, we can handle that in theory. Do you think that that's their thinking with this, or is it more of, we have to figure out who our quarterback is so that when we get into the thick of the schedule, that we'll be ready?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So if I remember Ohio State's schedule, it's Indiana, and then I think they play Youngstown State in another G5 school, and then they have Notre Dame. So I think that it's going to be this first 3 weeks of the season where they get it sorted out before they take on Notre Dame from a matchup from last year earlier in the season. So Ohio State should be able to compete in their first three matchups, without – they're going to be, 15, 16-point favorites in all of those games. That fourth game is the first test. So who is the starter in that game probably matters more than who's the starter in week one against Indiana.
Great, that makes sense. And with Sam Hartman quarterbacking Notre Dame, you may not have a superstar there, but you have a in college terms, a grizzled veteran who doesn't make a lot of mistakes from a college game standpoint, who's going to manage this offense. So hopefully, if you're an Ohio State Buckeyes fan, you're going to need to have that resolved, because Hartman's going to keep that team in the game. So
I agree with you on Hartman and the balance that he brings to Notre Dame. I mean, it's been a long time since we've seen them pass to wide receivers. I don't think a tight end had a reception in that game against Navy. So Sam Hartman bringing a lot of balance there.
Yeah. So what's your second point that as we enter in, the end of August, early September, heading into Labor Day?
Yeah, I'm actually trying to choose between two different ones, and I think I'll have the opportunity to talk about another one later. So I'm going to say, watch Joe Milton at Tennessee. He's one of these guys who has a Jamarcus Russell level arm, and that's why you see some people touting him as being a first round NFL quarterback. But the last time I checked, he's lost quarterback battles everyone he's been in until now, including losing to Hendon Hooker last year and losing the Michigan job to Cade McNamara. So before he transferred to Tennessee, it's his job. I'm going to watch him because there's a highly touted the first player to be associated with millions of dollars in the NIL space was Nico Iamaleava, who's now the freshman quarterback at Tennessee. So, if things don't go well and Joe Milton continues to be this physical specimen that can't put it all together, then the crowd is going to be calling for Nico Iamaleava. Now, obviously, just like most big schools, they have kind of these glorified scrimmages to start off the season, and so Milton should be fine, but he should be fine. I think that's what we're looking for, to make sure that he can put it together in Josh Heupel's system, this high-flying Art Briles system. So that's the other thing I just kind of want to check here in week one.
Awesome. So who are some college football players under the radar for you? That you're looking at that haven't emerged yet, but you're thinking these are folks that your campus to Canton leagues either going to be people are going to be crowing about a little bit, or people who are casual college fans are going, who was that? And this is exciting.
This is the third storyline that I wanted to talk about, and I'll get the opportunity to talk about it here. Mr. Waldman, your Georgia Bulldogs there, they've lost Branson Robinson to a torn patella. Kendall Milton, I think, has hamstring injuries in the running back room, and then Dejon Edwards, I believe, is also suffering from an injury. They've had to elevate walk-ons to give first-team reps to, but that means that this three-star from last year's class, who tore his ACL coming out of Dallas Paris Episcopal High School in the Texas Association of Private and Parochial Schools division. That's the same division that Deion Sanders and Shedeur Sanders came from before they went to Jackson State, that division. There's a running back there named Andrew Paul, 5'11", 220 pounds, that we saw with like a 21.5 mile per hour time in his high school tape. Just an explosive player who ran for 2,500 yards. I think it was the most in the country. It is Texas high school football. That particular division is considered a weaker division within Texas high school football. Nonetheless, he looks like an NFL player when you look at him. Going into his senior year, I think, even into the season, he had one FCS offer. You get into the middle of the season, it's everybody who's offered him. Michigan, Georgia, Auburn, Alabama, everybody comes calling because of this explosive final season that he had at Dallas Parish Episcopal. Well, lo and behold, last year it looked like he was pressing Branson Robinson, the highly touted freshman.
Wow.
Now Branson Robinson is out of the picture, unfortunately, due to injury. It doesn't look like Kendall Milton is going to be ready. It doesn't look like Dejon Edwards is going to be ready. Oh, wait a minute. Who's the guy that's left standing who's healthy? It's this three-star, this big, fast three-star from Dallas Parish Episcopal. So does Andrew Paul, is he the starting running? That would be just nuts to me if this three-star running back who didn't even have an offer from Georgia going into his senior year, now he's going to start game one potentially. That's definitely an under-radar player because he's had so many more highly touted players in front of him. So Georgia week one, you got to talk about Andrew Paul as being an under-the-radar player.
That's awesome. That's awesome. That's a very cool, and especially behind a team like Georgia with that surrounding talent, you can plug some players in who may not be like, who may have been bigger names at other schools, but they can come right in and produce behind a line, or with a defense like Georgia's as well. So that's a pretty good get right there. I want to mention this. One thing that is new, that it's going to be new with the show on a weekly basis, or when we do this every other week, is we're going to have a segment with a guest who's going to provide us a little bit of information, not only from on players like that we like to talk about, but also guys from the trenches. And that's going to be a guy who's going to be contributing at the RSP site by the name of Kyrie Demos. And Kyrie is a former offensive lineman at Buffalo who used to have to face off with Khalil Mack in practice. He's written for the Buffalo Bills website, and I'm really excited about him contributing to the RSP site. He's going to be joining us for a segment, that's going to be discussing more about the college game, and we look forward to that. That's going to start in a couple weeks. The next, when we convene next time. With that in mind, I want to call Kyrie kind of a sleeper because I think we're going to see him emerge in terms of the space of what we have going on, this season. But who's another person that hits your list,
Yeah, I think I'm going to continue. I'm going to continue to have a Georgia theme here, and I'm going to continue with running backs who are being elevated because of something that happened in the running back room. So if you haven't been following college football, there's been this betting scandal throughout the state of Iowa between both Iowa and Iowa State where players have been charged with some gambling-related crimes and are away from the team. That includes Iowa State, where both their projected starting quarterback, Hunter Deckers, and their projected starting running back, Jarrell Brock, are gone. So here's the Georgia angle. The projected starter now with Brock gone is Ware County alumni Cartavius Norton. Cartavius Norton, who I forgot what the college football, Bill Connolly. Bill Connolly had projected as a starter last year as a true freshman, but he tore he had a really severe hamstring injury, like right when he was going to start getting going, and that kind of derailed him. Well, he's clearly going to be the guy who carries the load this year, and we know that Matt Campbell likes a certain type at running back. He's had David Montgomery there. He's had Breece Hall there. And we all kind of thought that Cartavius Norton would be the next kind of guy. Played, again, at Ware County with Thomas Castellanos, who's now the second-string quarterback at Boston College. Just a really exciting duo there. And so as far as under the radar goes, I think this is a guy that he's lower, I think he was a 3 or 4 star recruit, so not some 5-star guy that we really liked, that we thought could play in year one, got injured. Well, now the backfield is going to be to himself. Not only the backfield, but they might have a true freshman starting at quarterbacks. If that's the case, I'm going to turn around and hand it to my 220-pound back and run the ball a lot. So Cartavius Norton, Iowa State, he's under the radar. But because of those gambling allegations, he's probably going to be the clear guy. So, and I know Mr. Waldman likes running backs. Mr. Waldman's from Georgia. Why not give him 2 Georgia running backs here to start things off?
See, look at that, playing to the crowd already. I would, I think, I don't know if LaDamian Webb is a sleeper, but I mentioned him on our other show just in passing. But I watched this kid, 5'7", 208. He can run zone. He can run gap. I watched him do pretty well at South Alabama against UCLA last season. He can catch the ball. He runs through you. He will definitely break tackles, and he's got that nice movement. He can pair moves together where he's got that nice stick and spin in the middle of the crease where he can really set you up, and you've got to wrap and hit to bring this guy down with that low center of gravity. So I don't know if he's a highly known player because, from a campus to Canton standpoint, but I'd have to imagine that he was reasonably well known early in his career, went JUCO, and then maybe his stock dropped after that. But I wouldn't be surprised if he's a guy that kind of emerges as a kind of more of a compelling sleeper on the draft set, like once we get into late December, early January.
So Damian Webb, yes, he is a guy that's the great thing about campus to Canton is you have these guys like, Nicholas Singleton, who's projected to be, first or second round draft pick, but there's value in these G5 players who produce on the college side, get a lot of points, and you have Mr. Waldman telling, hey, this is somebody who might have NFL potential. I just wanted to look at our weekly CFF rankings for week 1, and LaDamian Webb is in the top 20, and he's projected for 18.8 points this week. That's a good running back this week. So we're starting him in C2Cs.
That's awesome. How about Nakia Watson?
Nakia Watson transfer from Wisconsin now at Washington State. This is the thing about Nakia Watson is we've seen these Washington State running backs over the years, whether it be Boobie Williams or who was the guy that they were trying to compare to Christian McCaffrey, the running back there. I cannot remember his name. Yeah. So I think that there's some natural skepticism for running backs from Washington State, given his predecessors, but I've got Nakia Watson in a couple of places, and there's a diminutive backup. Oh, what's his name? I cannot remember. I will remember his name because I have him rostered somewhere. But there's he has a true sophomore behind him who's going to be an excellent player in his own right. I do not know about Nakia Watson's NFL potential, but I have him in my starting lineups on the college side of my campus to campus.
Yeah, there's some skills to that kid. Like I think that I would like to joke as a former Big Ten fan that who probably wasn't a fan of Wisconsin players, that if you're gonna just like helmet scout or logo scout, that you could say Nakia Watson didn't fit Wisconsin, and that's a bad thing for Wisconsin, not necessarily a bad thing for Nakia Watson. I would say that his pass catching skills and his ability to make the first man miss are really fairly notable. I think that there's some inside running skills that I want to see a little bit more from his game in that respect, but he's someone I'm kind of keeping an eye out for.
Max Borghi is the name that
Max
I've come to remember.
Borghi, there you go. Yeah, I never was a Max Borghi fan, to be honest. That was one that puzzled me. It kind of puzzled me the same way that the the McBride kid out of who went to Minnesota and just got cut today.
Dwayne McBride.
Yeah, I didn't really understand the Dwayne McBride hype. Like that one was like, you liked him. There you go. It's all right. It happens. Look, I still like Trey Sermon and still don't understand what's going on, and everyone's probably laughing about that. But that's the way it goes. So we, those are a couple of guys that certainly fit the bill. Anybody else that fit the bill for you?
As far as under the radar players, I mean, we can do this all day. I don't know how long.
Do one more. Let's do one more.
So let's go to the quarterback position then.
Okay.
And this goes into another week one storyline because the Washington Huskies are considered a playoff contender. There are a couple of guys on that team that could end up on your dynasty fantasy football rosters. I think Michael Penix Jr. is a day 2 potential draft pick, but there's also 2 wide receivers there, Rome Odunze and Jalen McMillan. Rome Odunze is the outside guy. Jalen McMillan is the slot guy. That's not who I want to talk about, though. Washington is taking on Boise State in an interesting interconference matchup, and Talon Green, the quarterback for Boise State, is going to be one of the more fun players to watch this season. Cool. He's like 6'6", 210 pounds. He's a dual threat. He started as a redshirt freshman last year, including in the Mountain West Championship game against my boy Jake Haener in Fresno State. He is like the new G5 Mountain West quarterback to watch, in my opinion. Again, he's got a lot of length. He doesn't look like he's moving really fast, but those are some really long steps that he's taking. Last year, there were instances where as a passer, he looked completely lost. And what I mean by that is when a quarterback is rolling out, the picture of the defense doesn't really change a lot because you have a lot of time to look and see. It's not like you're doing 1, 2, 3 and throw. Like on these off script plays where you're breaking the play and rolling out, you have a lot of time to look. Where I've seen instances where he has all of that time to analyze where players are and he just throws it right to a quarterback. I'm like, that's more concerning to me when you're rolling out as opposed to when you're just taking the 3-step drop and throwing it, because when you're rolling out, the picture didn't change as much. So did you just think you were wearing the wrong color? So, but Taylor, last year was his first year as a starter. He has the tools to be a really high-end college quarterback and a really exciting quarterback. Takes on this high-flying Washington team. I bet you Washington, somebody can go look it up right now. I would expect Washington as a 15-point favorite. I think that they'll cover, but Talon Green is a guy that we're going to watch throughout the Mountain West, and then when we get to New Year's Six bowls and they're taking on, Michigan State in a bowl game or something, and they beat Michigan State, like, how did they do that? Well, it's because this guy developed throughout the season in his second year as a full-time starter. Very exciting player, so go ahead and watch Talon Green at Boise State. Boise State, by the way, that produced Dante Pettis, Titus Young, Kellen Moore. There's probably Doug Martin. I mean, there are a bunch of players from Boise State who've been relevant over the years.
Absolutely. We got Khalil Shakir, certainly another one who's going to get an opportunity there. And we got the quarterback, I'm trying to remember what his name is, that Mark Schofield was always a stand for, who had a really nice drop back game. But I can't remember his name right off bat. But we'll get into that in a minute here. But let's talk a little bit about NFL, and Brett Rippon was the guy. That was the name, Brett Rippon. But I want to talk a little bit about, now that the preseason is nearing its end, I want to talk about things that are, when you look at those highlights of players, go back and look at some of these things. What's a mirage maybe for, that has people excited about a player based on what they've seen in highlights, and what may be a real oasis, something that you can use as a resource. And we're going to talk first about some of the mirages. And I'm going to have 4 for you that I think are worthwhile to remember, either when you're looking at videos now or whether you start next year and look at the preseason next year if your drafts are mostly over. One of the things is when people talk about quarterback decision making or their throwing mechanics in the preseason, because right now opposing defenses aren't playing a lot of sophisticated schemes in the preseason. Their top players aren't playing for extended periods of time to bait and switch quarterbacks with different looks and playing them at an expert level. You know, you don't have, you don't, I'm giving a retired player as an example, but you don't have, there's players who can do some of the things that Ed Reed could do, to show you one look and then turn around and make it turn out that it's completely different of what he's selling. There are a lot of players in the league who can mess with you that way, whether it's on the lineman along the line, or whether it's a linebacker showing a blitz, or how these veterans read your body language and destroy a play because you've been given a tell that you didn't even realize. So when people talk about quarterback decision making during the preseason, that's not the time I'm looking at that, because that can be a false positive in a big way. I would say then also throwing mechanics is the same thing, because if there's a play, a lot of people ask me this with Anthony Richardson. Well, I want to see whether his lead foot is in the ground, and you can tell they've watched all these clips with either QB School or somebody else who does great work in talking about the mechanics of quarterback technique. And that's great. Now, they may have improved from what Anthony Richardson did at Florida last year. But again, when I watch players who've shown improvement in the preseason, I still think of another Florida player, Tim Tebow, where he would show improvement in the preseason, and then when those complex defenses come, or he gets hit hard a few times by some blitzers that he didn't expect coming, or the defense has really gotten a run on him over a period of plays, guess what usually happens to most players? They revert back to their bad habits, because now they're thinking rather than just reacting, and it takes a while for those mechanics to really be intact. So I'm a little leerier about, his mechanics look good on this, on this particular play in the preseason against a vanilla defense. I'm waiting to see how they show up in, I don't want to say trauma-like situations, but, when things aren't going well. Because when things aren't going well, that's when you see how consistent they are.
I just want to give an example of what it is that you're talking about. So, I mean, I didn't play at the NFL level, but definitely in college, when we got to the spring game, we would play man, cover 2, and cover 3, and that's it. And we wouldn't blitz, we wouldn't disguise, anything like that. When I say disguise, I mean, if you're playing cover 3, there's one safety that's going to spin down. Now, you'll see it in the NFL where that it can look like it's cover 2, and it looks like cover 2 until the ball is actually snapped and one safety actually comes down, and then you got the free safety. Like somebody like Ed Reed can cover so much territory, so they can stay on that hash and then go cover the middle after the ball is snapped. And it's just little things like that. Or we would do a cover 2 alignment. We would do I'm trying to think of something else. We would show like a man alignment if we were in a game, and it'd actually be, cover 3 or cover 2 or cover 4, whatever it was. We just, when we did the spring game and we were practicing, and we wouldn't do any of that disguising that stuff. But when it came to the game, obviously you're going to get your fire zones where that fourth rusher is going to come from somewhere else, and you might have a defensive lineman back up. Your safeties are not going to telegraph what it is that you're doing just by looking, whether it's middle field open, middle field close, not all the time. So yeah, there's little things that you got to pick up, and that's how I mean, we don't defenders, we don't get the ball. So that's how we get to have fun is disguising what the defense actually is pre-snap.
Without a doubt. And then we didn't even get into like hybrid coverages where one side of the field may look like they're playing a zone and the other side is playing man, and there's and then maybe they show something that looks like it might be that as a early pre-snap tell, and it turns out they're disguising that, and it might be the opposite of what you're looking at. And there aren't a lot of teams in the college game that do that level of hybrid coverage looks to where Peyton and his brother might be on a Monday night show, and they're going, I think that might be this, but they're both kind of still trying to ferret it out well after the play is over because they can't really quite tell themselves. When hybrid coverages can be that complex where you're, in theory it might be this, but we don't know unless we ask the players. So that kind of thing is an issue. Another one is with wide receivers and tight ends, and that's seen them operate versus zone coverage. A good example of that is Calvin Watkins, who performed really well in the preseason, but just got cut by Cleveland today. A lot of the looks that you saw were either against, cornerbacks playing off and outside and giving the inside up, or him working a lot of zone. And he's making big plays and getting a lot of yards, and that's exciting. But at the end of the day, when getting open against zone is easier than getting open against man, unless you're the slot receiver who's supposed to understand a lot of the different defensive looks and calls and being on the same page as your quarterback. If your quarterback's a hyperactive kind of coach on the field type like Aaron Rodgers or Tom Brady or Peyton Manning, players like that, Burrow probably to that extent. Those types of things where they're playing that chess match, and you've got to be in their head on that level. So zone coverage, it's nice and it's important, but it's still like if they're making the bulk of their plays off of that, you're not really seeing a test. And I would say the same thing is true with man-to-man plays that are fade routes. They're impressive. They're eye candy. We love seeing guys who can go up and win it, but we're not really seeing route running skills at the highest level. We're seeing some impressive things about going up and attacking and winning the football, but we're not seeing the setups and the myriad of ways that they read a defender and react to a defender and how well they can manipulate a defender just on a fade route by itself. So if you're seeing a steady diet of fades, Romeo Dubs, from last year, maybe you need to see more than just the pretty fade route there. And then I would say the same thing is true of schemed plays. I talk about matchup plays versus scheme plays. Matchup plays to me are one-on-one opportunities or plays against zone where the zone is rolled over against you and you have to kind of find the window against multiple defenders who are really making you the priority, or one-on-one against the defender who may have the boundary as their aid and not, a one-on-one where you have a two-way go, where you're actually having to, they know where you're going, they have an advantage of how to guard you, and you still have to win it, and it's a 3rd and 12, and you got to get those 12. Those are matchup plays. Scheme plays are what I would call Gabriel Davis plays, where you have a play action, misdirection play. Gabriel Davis sneaks out of the backfield and he's wide open in the flat for a touchdown. A lot was done to get Gabriel Davis open easily on that play. And I'm picking on Davis there. I mean, he's certainly a capable NFL player, but a lot of his plays that are either scheme plays or he's the third option running down the field, beating the defense who can't stretch the field. We're not going to be able to stay in coverage long enough unless they can get that sack at 2.5 seconds of Josh Allen. And when that doesn't happen, you have that Kansas City Chiefs playoff game where Davis went off on them because Allen continued to stay alive to find that third option. So, you got players like that, and they can be very effective for you. But again, when you see a bulk of plays that are just design screens, design throwbacks, trick plays, gadget plays, things that all the forces of the offense are designed to really set things up so that you have an open space to catch the ball and run, you're being schemed open. And a lot of, even your best players get those plays. But if a higher percentage of your plays are scheme plays than matchup plays, that may be something you got to go. That could be a mirage with that player.
I think of the Justin Jefferson, that fourth down catch against the Bills as a matchup play. It's like, all right, well,
Yeah.
it's going to I don't even know what number no, I don't even know what number Justin Jefferson is, but whatever. We're throwing the ball and everybody in the stadium knows it's going there.
Yeah. It's like Stephon Diggs in the same game. I mean, the play I described with Gabriel Davis came against the Rams in the opener. Later in that game, there was like a 3rd and 15, I think, where Jalen Ramsey's on Stephon Diggs, and it's basically an out route. He knew it was coming. They threw it anyway, and he still got open and made the catch. That's a matchup play. If you're an older listener, and you remember Matt Ryan, Roddy White was a matchup player to where Matt Ryan could throw 3rd and 17 comebacks to the opposite side of the field, and White was getting double covered and still making catches. That's matchup skill. So, when we talk about Oasis, like things you can like actually say is a resource for you to actually continue traveling down the road of getting good players. I would say hard yards by running backs is a good example of that, meaning that the defense is either stacked against them or somebody gets free on a block, penetration into the backfield, something screwed up about the run design, and the running back is still able to get, turn lemons into lemonade, turn a loss into a short gain or a loss into a no gain or turn it into a big one, but what you want to see is someone who understands the blocking scheme and doesn't take too many risks, and someone who also can create and understand, when to take the risk, when not to take the risk. Because, when we watch some players get like, easy bounce outs, like Tank Bigsby could wind up being a good player. No doubt that he has a lot of that capability. But what I've seen thus far in games is the yards that have come have been toss plays. Guess what Tank Bigsby did really well at Auburn? Toss plays. Plays on the perimeter. I've seen some runs where he worked up the middle and he ran hard in Jacksonville so far, but they've been pretty big creases. What I've always had questions about with Tank Bigsby were the hard yards. Can he get the hard yards and be disciplined and make the good decisions? So far, I haven't seen any evidence that shows he's developed that skill just yet. Now, I know Dearness Johnson can get hard yards, and I won't be surprised if Tank Bigsby, continues to grow at a level where he's the second leading ball carrier on this club. But I also can tell you that if he's not getting the hard yards, we might see Dearness Johnson leapfrog him by midseason if that doesn't happen. So that's an example of hard yards. Technically sound routes and hands by receivers and tight ends. To me, the technically sound route, I want to see receivers who can beat press, who show excellent movement that's efficient to be able to move a defender in the wrong direction. Being able, good footwork, being able to drop their weight and make crisp turns, being able to come back to the ball, being able to attack the ball early, use the correct hands position, and we could get into the whole Michael Irvin thing that people have been asking me about all day, but using the optimal hands techniques to attack the football. And a good example of a player who I think has shown technically sound routes, even though, and hands, is Dalton Kincaid. Watching Dalton Kincaid, even if he's facing two-way goes, where he's in a situation where he has a two-way go, which is advantageous to the offensive player, heavily weighted in their direction, didn't matter, because when you watch the way he ran the route, I don't care who was covering him outside of a Hall of Fame cornerback, he was probably going to win those routes. They were that well performed. So that's a part of scouting, is that, to me, if you can X out everything but what the player's doing and be able to pinpoint the techniques that they can do to put themselves in a winning situation, regardless of who was or what the situation was, and you can see evidence that points to the positive in that way, that's something you should be looking for when you're scouting talent. So I'd say technically sound routes are part of that. And good hands. I mean, Romeo Doubs kept making big plays after big plays last year, but at the same time, watching him in the 49ers preseason game and a couple other preseason games, the hands weren't quite there, and there were some drops when he had to face more difficult situations, just like there were at Nevada. Doesn't mean he's a bad player, just meant that, okay, let's slow our roll a little bit, at this point. Maybe he's still not quite where the hype is leading people towards. Maybe it'll get better this year. And then I would say pass placement to a certain degree is valuable, because whether it's caught or not, if the ball is placed in the right area, that tells you a good bit about the quarterback in terms of their thinking, what they're seeing with coverage, how they're reading the leverage, and how they're executing. So I like looking at pass placement, and then I would say pocket movement for quarterbacks. Same thing. Like, you're going to have more complex blitzes, and certainly there are going to be more confusing things happening with coverage that may impact how you move because you're overthinking while you're dropping back, and then suddenly maybe you're not quite aware of the pocket in the way that you used to be. But to a certain degree, if a player's moving well in the pocket and he's a young player, that tells me that the game's not moving so fast for him that he can't keep up. So that tells me that he's feeling comfortable at least with what he's seen thus far, and he has a fighting chance to build on that.
Yeah, that last one was about Anthony Richardson. I mean, he was dead to rights in one of those, and kind of spun out of that tackle and got 2 or 3 yards. But it's the same thing we saw from him at Florida. There was a number of those plays where he's able to keep his composure when the pocket is bearing down on. Not only when the pocket is bearing down on him, when defenders actually have their hands on him. I think I could come up with a list of these things from a college evaluation perspective, that things that just I don't give a lot of credit to. It's funny that you mentioned the contested catch go routes, because defenses are so vanilla. Defenses are often, for those who don't know, oftentimes like an automatic conversion for wide receiver and press is just you just run the go route. So if you it's just an automatic. So to the extent these coaches want to see that sort of matchup and how well this cornerback can compete, et cetera, that line up and press one high, like we know where the ball is going to go, like we want to see them compete. It's not necessarily indicative to what translates. And it's funny because in the spring of 2021, Alabama had 3 really highly touted wide receivers, only one of which is with the team now, Ja'Cory Brooks. Another was, one of these bigger possession wide receivers, a Guy Hall. And what did he do? What did he do in that first spring game? 2 long contested catches. And I'm like, tells me very little. Tells me very little about this player.
And we've all fallen for it as fantasy players. I mean, you have to go through that stage of education, and some people just never move past that.
Yeah, it's his value skyrocketed a bunch because of those 2 catches, and I mean, I really could. When I'm watching high school players throwing open go routes to the boundary, where a guy has 5 yards of separation, I'm like, well, I can't give you credit for that, because I would expect, most quarterbacks, even in high school, to make that throw. So there are a number of things.
Do that for next week, because that would be excellent, especially for folks, because folks who are listening to this obviously are interested in, the Devy side of things, to understand, they're going to go back, they're looking at college tape or huddle tape now at this point, and thinking, okay, how do I discern what's college ready and what's not? So that'd be great.
One of the reasons why Quinn Ewers, one of the most highly touted quarterback recruits in the last 10 years or so, even more so than Justin Fields and Trevor Lawrence. when I watched his high school tape, I see a halo around him as far as protection. I'm talking about nobody within 6 yards of him. He's got like 3 seconds to throw, and his wide receivers are wide open. Now, I want to see quarterbacks to make the easy plays consistently, but to see what you're made of, I have to see you face some sort of adversity, make some difficult throws when things aren't your way. And so I actually look for those. And if they aren't there, it doesn't mean that the player can't do it. It's just, well, I can't. I mean, I don't know that he can do it because he wasn't asked to.
Yeah.
They were just that much better than the teams that they played against. So there are a lot of question marks there. So it's funny that you mentioned that, because there have been a couple of highly touted quarterbacks who had there weren't difficult throws on their tape. There wasn't difficult situations in the pocket. I'm like, and Quinn Ewers was one. Sam Heward, one of the Heward family, the NFL family. He was another one at Washington. He's now at Sacramento State. I'm like, there's nothing here that tells me what skills this guy has. I mean, yes, you threw it 40 yards down the field. You hit an open wide receiver on a go route when you knew it, like there was no disguising of the coverage. You didn't fit it into a window. The guy had 4 yards of separation. I mean, lots of people listening to this podcast can complete that pass. So, you're making some good points, Matt.
Well, I'm looking forward to hearing more of yours. That'll give me some good ideas also when I start looking at Devy tape, because I know there's one league I'm in for sure, and there'll be 2 coming up down the line where I'm going to need to start getting a little bit of a jump on these guys, even if I'm just watching some highlights, and not going through the rigorous process that I do for college to pro. Let's end this with some college prospects from past, whether it's recent past or distant past, where we were just over the moon about what they were going to do. And we can talk about the ones that met expectations, as well as guys that didn't meet expectations. And I think a guy that right off the bat, to me, that I was over the moon about recently and just didn't work out was Dante Pettis. I thought Dante Pettis had a chance to be kind of like Brandon Lloyd in terms of like contested catch skill, not super fast, but really savvy with his movement to get people off their spot. Great runner after the catch, punt return skills, so you knew he was going to be good in the open field. And it certainly looked promising for him at the end of year 1 with the 49ers. Even though it wasn't like he had a complete game there, it just looked like that there were moments that you could say, yeah, this guy's going to be a playmaker. And then it just all fell apart. It fell apart where, like, Kyle Shanahan even said, look, this guy could be one of the best receivers in the league if he puts his mind to it and he works at it. And it just sounds like he didn't work at it. It sounds like, from what I'm seeing, he's a player who's good enough to be in the league, but isn't driven enough to be a top-tier starter. Like, he's talented enough to join a team and provide a contribution off the bench or as a reserve. But whatever it is, whether it's the desire, the ambition, the interest in other things, and that's okay. He doesn't want to be great at what he does. He's a great football player by college football standards, but he didn't turn out to be that other thing. And that's something where, and I'll definitely talk about some players that I just didn't see, that I feel like I misevaluated based on my own system. But this was one that, unless I got to interview the kid, I wasn't going to see coming.
Yeah, now let's just do 2 degrees of separation. Dante Pettis' brother played with Austin Pettis, played at Boise State with Titus Young, who was another second-round draft pick of the Detroit Lions, had that rookie year in 2011 where he was third fiddle to Nate Burleson and Calvin Johnson and was an excellent weapon and just kind of he wasn't even on my list actually, but he was an excellent weapon, a third receiving option there. Looked to be next up behind Nate Burleson, who would pair with Calvin Johnson, and just had some mental health issues and struggles, and could not turn them around. But I mean, you talk about guys who I don't even know if Titus Young was taken in the second round. He might have been a later round pick than that, but just an excellent freshman season. Who kind of could play inside and play outside. And I remember they were scheming up routes for him in the red zone. You know, they would be at the 3 and they would throw him outs and like really high difficulty throws, but they had trust in him. So I mean, since you mentioned Dante Pettis, Dante Pettis. Austin Pettis, I believe, is his brother.
Yep.
And then I have to mention Titus Young. I gotta mention Titus Young.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll stick with receivers. We'll have to talk about Hakeem Butler. Certainly, I think if there's a player that I missed on based on how I evaluated the player and what I missed was probably, a couple of things. The nuance of route skills that he would need to have to be a strong NFL player, and the consistency of his hands. And obviously the consistency of his hands was an issue. And then it looks like the same thing has to do probably with routes in terms of how versatile or lack of versatility that he has to offer. And he tore up the USFL, or is it the XFL? He tore up the XFL this past year as a big slot receiver. And didn't make the Steelers team. Now Steelers have a pretty good set of wide receivers and young talent, and they brought in Allen Robinson, who is still a capable player to play in the slot. But it didn't, he was up and down in camp catching the football. And when one of the things with Butler and Pettis that I hadn't, that was, I don't have anything in common with those two guys other than I missed on them. But with Pettis, I would say that miss is more due to off-field things that I don't have the resources to study to the degree that I did, that I do with on-field work. Unless I have a team of investigators or an industrial psychologist, or I can literally interview these players. And I'm not saying journalist interview. I'm talking like real job interview type of stuff. Not going to happen. But with Butler, I studied him before I believe I really started implementing a lot of Coach Lieberman, Drew Lieberman's techniques for coaching receivers. And you can find Drew Lieberman's work at the Sideline Hustle. For a while on my board back here was literally notes just that covered the entire back wall from his YouTube channel, along with Jay Norvell's book on coaching wide receivers. And he coached Reggie Wayne, Marvin Harrison, a lot of the Colts players, Oklahoma receivers who went on to the NFL, Mark Clayton, guys like that. He knew a thing or two about coaching wide receivers. And I flooded this board with all that information for a couple of years and figured out how I wanted to grade the minutia of releases, the release types with hands and footwork, how you attack the football, things that I talk about a lot that seems to resonate, especially in the fantasy community of people who reference me a lot now about that. I got all that from Drew, who's been on my shows multiple times, talking about, players he's worked with, and he's, some of his clients include Evan Ingram, who just before his contract year last year, working on catching the ball, something that he had some issues with. Damier Byrd and Olamide Zacchaeus. Edelman, he's Mohamed Sanu. Dontavian Wicks is a player that he's worked with. Juwan Winfrey, guys who were getting on the verge to get drafted, but also guys who've been starters in the league. He's had his range of guys. And if you go on there on his site, he also interviews, top players like Cooper Kupp and Devontae Adams. His work's great, and he's down here in Atlanta right now. He's moved. He was a former assistant wide receiver coach at Rutgers and a coach at Wesleyan, and he's regarded in this community as a receivers coach to work with. And before, those things that all that minutia, those were things that I hadn't implemented yet when I watched Hakeem Butler, and I think I just missed enough with his hands techniques and his catching of the ball that it wasn't as consistent as it needed to be. The routes weren't quite there. I probably would have had a much lower grade on him if I went back and looked at that tape. And I may go do that at some point just to see if I can access enough to see if I would see it differently. Not that it's going to really matter much because I've already changed my system at that point, and gone around there. But he was a guy that, I was hopeful that maybe just because what we didn't see, we haven't seen him in games, that maybe it was just a dysfunctional Cardinals team, and maybe he just slipped through the cracks, because sometimes players do that, and then he gets labeled, and then he slips through. Raheem Mostert slipped through a lot of cracks, about 7 different cracks, before he ended up having some, a couple of big years. So it can happen, even though it's the exception to the rule. But yeah, Butler's certainly high on my list.
It's funny that you mentioned Jay Norvell, and because you threw out Evan Ingram's name, and he's on my list. Coming out of Ole Miss, there have been so many tight ends that I thought would kind of revolutionize that position, kind of the way Michael Vick or Randall Cunningham did the quarterback position. I thought Evan Ingram was one. I thought Vernon Davis was one. I know people think that Kyle Pitts is one, but when we saw this kind of big slot wide receiver who can play wide receiver snaps and then, line up in line if you wanted him to call him a tight end, I just thought that this is a guy who's going to catch 80 balls a year, be a mismatch for linebackers or safeties trying to guard him. He would be too agile for these linebackers, too fast for any safeties that tried to guard him. And especially if you remember the way Evan Ingram's rookie season started, his rookie year. I mean, I think he may have broke was more productive than it. I can't remember exactly. He had a very good rookie year and then never really capitalized on it thereafter. And I just distinctly remember him catching passes from our boy Chad Kelly at Ole Miss, and I actually thought both of them would be real game changers in the NFL. And Evan Ingram, to his credit, had a really good season last year. But I think when he was drafted in the first round with that tight end class of O.J. Howard, David Njoku, and himself all in the first round, I think a lot of us thought that those three had really, really high ceilings because of how athletic they were. And, Evan Ingram was probably the most athletic out of all of them. And speaking of preseason, I even remember him running some sort of double move from the slot in the preseason with the Giants. And I'm like, yep, it's going to happen. It's going to happen. He doesn't look like a tight end. He looks like a wide receiver. And it just never really panned out that way, even though he's still a really good and productive player, but not one that has changed like whether or not kids at that size play tight end now. He hasn't been that type of player.
Yeah, and if we're going to talk about players that I thought would be generational talents like that, Reggie Bush. I was over the moon about Reggie Bush. And Reggie Bush had a good career. He had a good NFL career. But I felt like Reggie Bush at USC played like the running back that you wanted to see in the NFL. When he got to the Saints, he looked like the running back who felt like he had to carry the team on his shoulders and was making very risky decisions, trying to get huge home run breakaway plays almost on every carry early in his career. And he didn't do that at USC, from what I remember. Now, that might be bias on mine because I haven't gone back to watch him. And it was, one of the first years I did the RSP. So it could very well be that I don't remember it accurately. But what I remember with Reggie Bush was carving an S through the secondary and going, that's one thing. But he wasn't trying to carve an S behind the line of scrimmage the way he was doing, in New Orleans. And that was the difference. That was kind of a bad difference. And then once he got banged up and he had to change his game a little bit to like run a little tougher, and he did. He did great in Miami from that perspective. But I thought this was going to be the next closest thing to Gale Sayers that we have ever seen. And that was probably youthful enthusiasm to a fault on my end, in terms of guys that, not a bad career, but not oh my God, he's a top 3 pick overall, and he's going to be a LaDainian Tomlinson, Marshall Faulk-esque type of talent.
I mean, I think everyone's right there with you. I think that everyone is right there with you. And part of his good career was spent with my Detroit Lions, a playoff team in 2014. So I'm appreciative to him for that. I want to give you 2 to make sure I get them in, because I have no idea when you're going to end the show. So I'm going to make sure I get these.
No, get your 2 in, man. Do it.
So we got to mention Ramondre Stevenson. Ramondre Stevenson coming out of Oklahoma. I remember seeing this guy who was like, he's just so thick and dense that even without trying, defenders just kind of fall off of him. And he can run with a low center of gravity. He has great hands. And then even for a smaller back, he has excellent feet, but definitely for his size. I think at the combine, when he weighed in at like 230 or whatever it was, I was ecstatic because I know that dude played at 250 at Oklahoma.
Yeah.
I mean, he looked like he was 250 pounds, and he came in. You could tell that he was really about his business. And then, has been rewarded for his play and quite frankly, keeping that weight off with the New England Patriots. So Ramondre Stevenson is one, and we share that. I mean, I remember listening to you.
I know you were over the moon about him.
Ramondre Stevenson. So that's on a good one. And then my last one, I have to bring in Michael Vick here.
Sure.
Because of what we saw with him from the Eagles, like that could have been a 15-year career of that. And Michael Vick, he's being interviewed and talked about how he didn't study the way he needed to and take care of his body, and was just kind of into the nightlife in Atlanta, being, he was an icon for several years there. But when I think about what could have been, I think that there's a chance that Michael Vick still, he had an MVP. There's a chance that he still gets to the Hall of Fame, but there was like that next, ceiling. When Deion Sanders talks about the upper room within the Hall of Fame, I think Michael Vick could have gotten to that sort of level had he been with, first of all, had he taken care of his business, had he been with someone like Andy Reid for the entirety of his career. Like, we could have seen that season where he came in on relief in that Monday night game against the Washington team, where he's had 7 touchdowns or whatever it was. Like, I think that there's the potential for that type of play for a longer period of time than we got to see it. I'll never forget, there was a long time where you could never go into Green Bay and win, especially in the playoffs, especially in the wintertime.
Yep.
And this indoor quarterback went into Lambeau and beat Brett Favre at Lambeau Field in the playoff. I'll never forget that, but I have to include Michael Vick on this list.
No, that makes total sense. Look, I could, everyone who listens knows about, how much I love Nick Chubb. I don't have to go into detail about that. Everyone on this show probably knows how much over the moon I was about Patrick Mahomes. So I'm not gonna. I'm just dropping their names only slightly because you mentioned Michael Vick, and it hit me that I need to mention just another player that I absolutely whiffed on. And I've pretty much only offered players I've whiffed on or missed to some degree tonight, and I'm okay with that. That's cool. But I had to name drop the Vic and Mahomes, because when I tell you this one, I'm kind of ashamed of it, to the extent that I am, because in a league I was in one of the first dynasty IDP big roster leagues I was in, I had Michael Vick on my team, and I traded him away for peanuts and Byron Leftwich. And the league was like, this was an awful trade. But I was, I still fought for it, and they let me have it, because I was over the moon about Byron Leftwich. I watched him in a game with David Garrard where the Marshall team had to carry him up and down the field in that shootout. And he looked like a Hollywood hero in the way that he played. And this was before I started evaluating talent. But I watched him from highlights. I watched his toughness in his game, and I thought, this guy has it. This guy is a winner. This guy is a smart quarterback. And he was all those things. He just happened to have the Jameis Winston loping drop back that's slow, and the wind up that's slower. And you can process as fast as you want, but if your technique doesn't match your processing, you're always going to be one step behind or two steps behind. And he was kind of like, Jameis Winston was a higher evolution level of player on the Byron Leftwich scale. Byron Leftwich was probably was on the low end of that scale of a guy in terms of his footwork and all of those things. So yeah, that was an absolute disaster. So look, I've been doing this for well over 20 years now. We're all going to have our hits and misses. This was early on for me, but that was probably the worst miss of all time, and the one that I would say to anybody, it's like, if you got to take chances, but you're going to have big screw ups, and that one is a huge one. That's one I don't think I've ever shared with anybody, on air. But it's about time that I do, because man, yeah, that was awful.
That was probably right around the time the NFL was like, these pure drop back passers, we don't like them anymore. We're gonna do it. We're gonna do away with that breed of quarterback.
But on that note, listen, we appreciate you tuning in, and as always, you can find Felix Sharpe at Sharpe Review on X, Twitter, whatever you want to call it, at Matt Waldman. Go to Campus to Canton, sign up, play both sides. There we go. See, I remembered it now. I don't know what was going on before. I think I had Travion Henderson on the brain. That's probably what it was. But, we'll see you in a couple of weeks. And if you haven't gotten your RSP and you still got some drafts going on, hey, go get it. Go check it out. I can tell you right now, I don't think I have any Byron Leftwich-like selections this year based on how things are shaping up. Knock on wood here. But I think I'm long past those, though he's made an intriguingly good coach. But I don't study coaches. So thanks again, Matt Waldman, RSP.com, and have a good night.